Count us in while I'm counting, or you can. All right. Going live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Oh, you're not on Zoom?
Good evening. Welcome to the May 22nd, 2025 Rental Housing Committee regular meeting. The meeting is called to order at 7:01 p.m. Now I will proceed with roll call. Andrea?
One moment, please. Okay. All committee members are present.
I feel like we used to do that. All right, all committee members are present. Now we're on. Yeah, but usually we change the slides by now. All right, it is now item 3, the consent calendar. These items will be approved by one motion unless any member of the committee wishes to remove an item for discussion. The purpose of the consent calendar is for the committee to efficiently and quickly consider routine or administrative business items with one motion. Public comment will occur after the discussion. We invite you to submit a speaker card now if you would like to speak on this item during public comment. Would any member of the committee like to pull an item? Robert, you're recognized.
Yes, I just want to make a few comments on 3.3 and ask a question on 3.4.
Okay, I believe that would not just, we're not pulling those items off. Those would just be part of the main discussion. Anyone else would like to pull any items off? Seeing none. I now invite public comments. In-person public comments will be called to speak first. Seeing none. Any member of the public wishing to provide a virtual comment on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. I do not see any hands. Okay, moving on. I will now bring back the item for committee action. Okay, we'll move to Robert with your comments then.
Sure. Okay, so on 3.3, yeah, I usually like to make some brief comments on the activity report. And let's see, I think we have good numbers on the properties registered and rental housing fees paid at 95%, but it does seem to have plateaued. So I'm still interested sometime into the future if we can understand what the composition of that 5% noncompliance, both on registered and rental housing fees paid, consists of. It's good to see that there's low activity on no-fault evictions.
Hang on, can you pause for a moment?
Sure.
Are we on mute?
I can hear me.
Okay, because on the Zoom, usually the captions would show up by now, but there's nothing showing up. All of these are muted. Like, is that supposed to be muted? Like, okay. Now it's can't hear us, she'll tell us then. Okay. You want to go continue on, Robert?
All right, to keep going, Trejo's at 0 and which is the tenant relocation assistance ordinance, means that we are not having people relocated out of the city that need to be compensated because they're low enough income, and we only had one in the last 2 years. It just means that this is an extremely slow period for redevelopment. Rents on newly built units are only up 6.4% since 2017. That compares to 25% general inflation, so that's a good thing. Let's see, vacancy, and for fully covered units, it's 17% compared to the 25% still. It means that they're lower than general inflation. Vacancy rates.
I'm sorry, but apparently we are on mute.
Oh, you think the public can't hear any of this?
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
Oh.
Nas is on the line. She can't hear anything. Oh, now we're good.
Yep, now she can hear.
All right, we can speak.
Okay.
You want to start from
Maybe
top?
I better start from the beginning. Sorry that, this will take a minute longer than I was expecting. Okay, so I'm making some comments on item 3.3, the activity report. I usually like to comment on this because it's important. For many people have asked me that they want to know how things are going, and this wonderful report is the best way I know to tell them the answers. So anyway, one thing is on properties registered and rental housing fees paid. They're both at 95%, and that's a good number, except that it seems to have plateaued. So I would still like to understand the composition of the 5% noncompliance, but that's not an urgent issue. We've discussed it in the past. I'm just mentioning it so that it doesn't go off the radar. I'm glad to see there's low activity on no-fault evictions. according to, particularly with regard to withdrawal of units. And the tenant relocation assistance ordinance was 0 for this year and only 1 for the last 2 years. It means that in the last 3 years, we've only had 2 people that needed to be compensated because they had to leave their apartments. And so it means the displacement is at a pretty low rate. And rents on newly built units are only up 6.4% since 2017 cumulatively. That compares with 25% general inflation. So it means that for newly built units, the rents and the cost of living are becoming less of an issue than other items in the typical basket of things people have to buy. And for fully covered units, it's 17%, still less than general inflation, which is a plus. Vacancy rates about 5% for fully covered units, and that's normal. And, so it means that even if you wanted to go out and find a fully covered unit, you could probably find one. And it means that it isn't that the people who are in the fully covered units are holding on to them and keeping other people from being able to find apartments, which is good. Newly built units at 12.5% vacancy. That's down from 15%, so that's an encouraging sign that it's moving toward normal. And key issues for the future are how is remote work going to continue to affect things, and what will be the effect of AI on tech jobs, because tech jobs have a lot to do with, with how expensive it is to rent an apartment here. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
All right. Does anyone else would like to speak? Oh, right. Recognized member.
Just the press. Forgive me, this is my first time. Beautiful report, use it as an example. My question is, when you say total no-fault evictions or at-fault evictions, does this number include UDs too, or is it just notices? Oh, sorry. Unlawful detainer, that's the court action for.
It's just including the termination notices, not the termination notice follow-up option, which includes UDs.
Would it be possible to report those numbers? Hoping they're pretty low because
they're very low.
Much lower than ours. Because I think what would be helpful is to know, to look side by side, like there's the notices, the work you guys do at your clinic, and how you may be able to stop evictions and to be able to show, a lower number of forced evictions. That was my only question.
All right. Seeing no other speakers, a motion is in order. All right. Do you want to go? I thought you were. Okay. Yeah, we can do all of this together. So you want to, Vice Chair?
Yeah, let me ask my one question about 3.4. I had sent in a question asking how it was that an OTUA petition can lead to a downward adjustment of rent. And the example was good in showing me the mechanics of what to do if you got one. But I'm still trying to understand, how does it what circumstances does that happen to make that occur? I mean, is it because the only thing I can think of is, I know that when we were calculating, what the adjustments for rent would be, that, you end up maxing, the utilities that were paid over the last year with, some kind of like county level maximum or something like that. Is that how that occurs to cause a downward adjustment of rent? But what I want to know is, what are the circumstances that cause that? Because, obviously, if you got a question in from a landlord asking about it, it means it can happen. So maybe if it's easy to clarify, help me understand how it happens. That's what I was trying to get at.
So in this process, we ended up with 2 comparator numbers for the petition adjustment. We have the calculation for the Mountain View calculation that the committee chose, which is based on the number of rooms in the unit and a few other things. And then we have the county comparator from the Housing Authority, which calculates a number of things on a very large chart. When the RHC determined the regulations, they chose to choose between those two numbers the lesser of those two numbers. That is where the actual adjustment is coming from. It does not come from the average of what the utility costs were through RUBS for each unit.
Okay.
So if you have that number, whichever one of those numbers it is, we then compare it to the average of the utility for the utility provision for the unit for that same time period. And whichever one, based on that, it's either an upward adjustment or a downward adjustment. So it's literally comparing the adjustment number to the utility average over the course of that year.
Okay.
And because of that, it can go up or down. So it's not, when you're thinking of it, it's not the rent that's going up or down, right? So it's if we, like in the example, it shows $1,000 for the rent, plus whatever the utility adjustment is, becomes the new total rent. That utility adjustment amount is what we're looking at to determine if it's an upward adjustment or a downward adjustment.
So, I mean, the utility adjustment, can it actually be a negative number then?
Well, compared to the utility average,
Oh,
it can be less than the utility average that was used by that tenant.
So it can be less than what the tenant was paying on average monthly? Because the way RUBS was allocated to each tenant may be different from the way we are allocating it through the petition process.
Okay, so the main thing I'm trying to understand is that it seems that when you have an adjustment, I mean, because intuitively, if they're paying something for the utilities and the utilities get included in the rent and they weren't included during RUBS, or are we saying?
The tenant's always been paying the utilities, but they've been paying them through a RUBS system.
Okay, I get it.
That's the issue. So they've
Okay.
been paying, but they've been paying through an allocation that doesn't necessarily reflect their actual use, and
Yeah,
maybe using
yeah.
an algorithm that would allocate more utilities to that tenant than if you
Okay.
just allocated them equally per bedroom, or per room, which is what your process does.
Right. Okay, I understand it now. Thanks for the clarification.
I would just like to test my understanding as well on the same issue. So when we're talking about the change in rent, where you have a new rent that includes the utilities as calculated, and the prior rent, if it didn't include utilities, we're adding in the average utilities to the prior rent.
We're not adding in the average utilities, we're adding in the calculation from whichever option was lesser.
In the prior,
So in the regulations, you have two options for the.
I think I understand that. So
So what the average usage is not what's being added onto the rent.
in the current, for the new rent.
But when we're determining whether it's upward or downward, we're taking that premises rent number plus the average utility number and comparing it to the premises rent plus the adjusted utility number.
So in coming up with what was the existing rent before the one-time utility adjustment, we are taking the rent without utility and adding an average utility cost.
Based on what the tenant
Essentially.
actually paid for the last 12 months.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Member Brown, recognized.
So rent includes utilities, right? Rent.
Correct.
So over a year, the amount that someone pays in the base rent and the utilities is their total rent paid for that year. And with the calculations that we do through the one-time utility adjustment process, we've changed the future projected allocation of utilities for that unit. on top of the base rent that they're assumed. And that could either be greater or lesser than the previous year's
Average.
rent.
Correct.
So it can either go up or down based on the floating changes over time. And that's it. And then that says upward adjustment or downward adjustment.
Correct.
And if it's a downward adjustment, that's not a rent. It does not trigger a rent increase, and that's the thing that we are codifying. We don't have it. Doesn't it's not a magical circumstance that also then lets do an out of band rent adjustment that they would otherwise not be entitled to.
So basically what these regulations are saying is if it's a downward adjustment, the property owner is not entitled to give an AGA if they haven't if they've given an AGA within the past 12 months.
It doesn't reset a clock of any
Correct.
sort.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, seeing no other discussion, we have a motion on the floor that's by Member Brown, seconded by Vice Chair Cox. Member Brown, would you like to say the motion?
I would like to move the consent calendar items.
Can you please?
Are there any that I have to read the titles of?
You have to read the titles of all of them.
Okay. I would like to move that we approve the minutes for the April 24th, 2025 RHC meeting. That we receive the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act and Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance financial expenditures for fiscal year 2024-25 through March 31st, 2025. That we receive the Rent Stabilization Division fiscal year 2024-25 activity report through March 2025. And that we receive the report on the notification of minor clarification in CSFRA regulations, chapter 13, utility charges, as we just discussed.
All right, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. Motion passes unanimously. We will now open the meeting for oral communications from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the committee from acting on non-agenda items. Would any member of the public like to provide comment on non-agenda items? If you'd like to speak on this item in person, please submit a speaker card to city staff now. In-person public comments will be called to speak first. Any member of the public wishing to provide a virtual comment on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Seeing no one in person, seeing no hands on Zoom. All right. We will now move to agenda item 5.1, fiscal year 2025-26 budgets and annual fees for the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act and Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance. Public comment will occur after the presentation item and committee questions. We invite you to submit a speaker card now if you know you would like to speak on this item during public comment. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. This is a continuance of the discussion that we had in our previous meeting in April, whereby the Rental Housing Committee reviewed the draft budgets and had no changes recommended. So today, we're hoping to adopt a resolution approving the fiscal year 25-26 budgets for the CSFRA and the MHRSO, and establishing a rental housing fee and space rental fee for the next fiscal year. The Rental Housing Committee is implementing the CSFRA and MHRSO and has the power and duties to establish and approve a budget for each fiscal year, as noted in the following sections in the CSFRA and the MHRSO. As I mentioned, on April the 24th, the Rental Housing Committee reviewed and accepted the recommended budgets with no changes. And there is one note: there is a change in the city's budgeting process, and therefore additional costs of $4,600 to the CSFRA and $800 to the MHRSO have been added. under the professional development item, and this also caused a small adjustment in the 20% reserve item. This is the draft budget as was presented last year, and the numbers in red represent the difference, the different numbers, adding the 4,600 in the CSFRA budget here, bringing the reserves to $518,071, with an ending balance of 66,181. And this is an overview of the CSFRA budget with the key items. The operating expenses come out to $2,330,636. The city administration and interfund expenses on $259,720, and the reserves, as I mentioned before, $518,071. The rental housing fee was discussed last time, and the proposed $130 per unit, which comes out to $10.83 per month, is a result of the approved budget. So here we have the MHRSO budget with the numbers in red that have been changed. $800 have been added to the operating expenses, bringing the reserve to $59,949. So the MHRSO budget operating expenses amount to $262,013. The city administration and interfund to $37,730, and the reserves $59,949. And the MHRSO space rental fee comes out to $142 annually, or $11.83 a month, and this reflects the 50% fee level reduction as previously discussed. The adoption of these budgets will provide appropriations for the operation of the CSFRA and MHRSO programs. CSFRA is a 100% cost recovery program and fully funded by the fees. And as mentioned previously, the MHRSO is also a cost recovery program and funded by the fees, but the program for next fiscal year is supplemented by the city's general fund in an amount of $50,000. Once approved, these budgets will be forwarded to Finance and Administrative Services Department for incorporation in the citywide fiscal year 25-26 budget process. So the recommendation is to adopt a resolution approving the fiscal year 25-26 budgets for the CSFRA and the MHRSO, and establishing the rental housing fees and space rental fees for next year. This concludes the presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
All right. Do any members of the committee have any questions? Seeing none. Since there are no questions, I now invite public comments. In-person public comments will be called to speak first. Any member of the public wishing to provide virtual comment on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Seeing no hands raised. Next, we will go into committee deliberations and feedback. Would any member of the committee like to propose a motion? I see Robert, Vice Chair Cox, and seconded by Member Hislop. Would you like to say the motion?
I move that we accept the fiscal year 2025-2026 budgets and annual fees for Community Stabilization, Fair Rent Act, and Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance changes, to adopt a resolution of the Rental Housing Committee of the Mountain View approving the fiscal 2025-26 budgets for the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act and the Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance, and establishing the rental housing fee and space rental fee for fiscal year 2025-26 to be, I'm reading it. Okay, that's it.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. Motion passes unanimously. We will now move on to agenda item 5.2, amendments to the CSFRA and MHRSO Regulations Chapter 2, definitions. Public comment will occur after the presentation item and committee questions. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
Thank you. So the purpose of this item is to review and approve amendments to CSFRA and MHRSO Regulations Chapter 2, which is the definitions chapter addressing certain fees charged by landlords for a tenant's requested reporting of positive rental payment information. Can go to the next slide. So as you all might remember back in, the Rental Housing Committee is empowered to establish rules and regulations for the administration and enforcement of both the MHRSO and the CSFRA. Getting into the reasoning for this background, if you all remember back in January, February, we did a review of the legislative updates to landlord-tenant law, and amongst those was Assembly Bill 2747, which went into effect on January 1st. And this requires most landlords to offer their tenants, any of the tenants who are responsible for the payment of rent under the lease, the option of having positive rental payment information reported to a nationwide consumer reporting agency. And there's noticing requirements around this, and also timelines by which they need to make this offer. This bill is intended to provide an opportunity for tenants to enhance their credit scores through consistent payment of rent. And the bill actually allows landlords to charge a fee for the time and efforts basically that it takes, or the cost of providing this service to the tenants, and that fee is the lesser of the landlord's actual costs, or $10 per month. And under AB 2747, the fee that a landlord charges for the positive rental payment information reporting cannot be the basis of an eviction. So if a tenant fails to pay that fee, then they cannot be evicted for the failure. The landlord just merely gets to stop providing the service, and it also cannot be deducted from the tenant's security deposit if they don't pay the fee. So really it's not treated as rent under the statute. We can go to the next one. I think I already said this. So this raised a question from property owners about how the requirement under AB 2747 to provide this service and the ability to charge a fee interacts with the CSFRA and MHRSO's limitations on rent increases. So basically the questions that were raised is whether these fees constitute rent under the CSFRA and MHRSO, and if they do, whether landlords and tenants have to submit a joint petition for additional housing services each time that a tenant elects to opt into the service. So in order to address these questions, staff is recommending adding language to Chapter 2 of the regulations for both the MHRSO and CSFRA, clarifying that the fees that are charged by a landlord for the provision of positive rental payment credit reporting are not considered rent under the CSFRA and MHRSO, and that the positive rent payment credit reporting itself is not considered a housing service. And so the recommendation is to review and approve these amendments to the CSFRA and MHRSO Regulations Chapter 2, addressing certain fees charged by landlords for a tenant's requested reporting of positive rental payment information. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Now we move on to questions from committee members. Do any committee members want to provide a question? Alternate Ball?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It makes sense. Are there any other examples of fees in the city of Mountain View that landlords and tenants voluntarily choose to transact, for lack of a better term, that this joins that category, or is this the first of a category?
This is the first that I can think of. I mean, tenants typically pay their PG&E directly to PG&E, and so that's not really that's only the only other situation where it doesn't really fall within the definition of rent, but it's related to a tenancy. I can't think of anything else, but I don't know.
Yeah, I can't think of any mandated, you know, this is in the statutes. So I can't think of any mandated, and there is a bill currently pending to basically limit the ability of landlords to just tack on fees, because they do it not because there's a statutory provision, but as a way of increasing rent. So just adding fees.
So at the moment, this is a unique provision, a definition specifically to accommodate the statute, but we don't really know of any other such examples at this time.
No,
Okay.
none that we can think of.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Member Keating.
So I just wanted to check that, for example, a pet fee, that would be considered a housing service and part of rent? Thank you.
That's good.
Member Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I get to do it this time. And that would be a housing service because if they did not choose to do it, they could get evicted for the behavior otherwise. I guess it's directly tied to their residency. Is that what differentiates?
Which one are you talking about?
Pet fees.
The pet fee?
Yeah.
Well, the pet fee
Or the additional
isn't
roommates or-
statutorily.
Yeah.
You know, this is a statute. Landlords are allowed to charge this fee. A pet fee is something landlords voluntarily charge. It's not authorized by statute, and we define it as a housing service in the CSFRA and the MHRSO.
Okay. Thank you.
Member Hislop.
Just to clarify, so in the statute itself, or in the bill, it says it's not part of rent. It's defined, or is that something we're doing in?
Yeah, so it doesn't directly say that it's not rent, but it's not treated as rent. A tenant can't be evicted for the failure to pay it. It can't come out of a security deposit. And basically the only consequence that a tenant faces for their failure to pay this fee is that the landlord stops the positive rental payment reporting. And they can't request that the landlord start reporting again for a certain amount of time. And so, based on staff's assessment, it's not really being treated as rent. And it also just would create a lot of complication because the statute gives the tenant the option to opt in and out of this at any time. And so if each time they decided to opt in or out, they had to do a joint petition, it would just be quite a onerous process for both the landlord and tenant, and we want to make it something that tenants can really be able to utilize this, the ability to have this positive rental payment information reported.
Yeah, I just wanted to clearly understand that this is kind of coming from the definition in this, or the how it's characterized in the statute, and I'm not aware of anything else that's like this for rental housing. Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, I now invite public comment. Any member of the public wishing to provide virtual comment on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. Seeing no hands, we will now go into committee deliberation and feedback. There's been a motion started by Vice Chair Cox. Is there a second to the motion? Okay, seconded by Member Keating. Vice Chair Cox, would you like to read the motion?
Yeah. Motion is to, first I just want to make a comment, and that's that I do agree you made the right call on this. This is sufficiently different than other things that are covered, in the CSFRA, that it deserves this kind of special treatment, and it is actually to the benefit of everyone to have this not, tied in with the other things, with the CSFRA and MHRSO. So I am making a motion to approve the amendments to the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act regulations and Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance Regulations Chapter 2 definitions addressing certain fees charged by landlords for a tenant's requested reporting of their positive rental payment information.
All right, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we will go with the vote. Vote is unanimous. Thank you. Unanimous in approval. All right, we will now move on to agenda 5.3, Rental Housing Committee meeting schedule for fiscal year 25-26. Public comments will occur after the presentation item and committee questions. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
So the purpose of this agenda item is to set the dates for the Rental Housing Committee meetings for fiscal year 25-26. And this comes from the CSFRE section 1709F and MHRSO section 46.9, requesting an adoption of an annual meeting schedule. So the meeting schedule is proposed as follows, trying to follow as much the fourth Thursday of the month. In the holiday months, it switches to the third Thursday of the month. And then in June, it switches to the second Thursday of the month. So the recommendation is to deliberate on this schedule and see if that fits within your personal agendas. That's the end of the presentation.
All right, we will now move on to questions from committee members. Does any member have a question? Please leave it to a question and not a comment in the form of a question. Sure. You recognize Member Hislop?
I know I asked this question in advance about and the reason I ask is because there's typically a meeting I have to attend on the second Thursday, but it's not critical. I'm here, and I get it that for the second Thursday in June that you have to tie it with the Mountain View City budget, and it's probably cutting it a little too close to the third. So
that's correct.
So I'm just acknowledging that.
Okay, sounds fine. Now we will go to public comment. Any member of the public wishing to provide virtual comment on this item, please click the raised hand button on Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. I'm seeing no one raising their hands. Therefore, we will go to committee deliberations and feedback. Would any member of the committee like to speak? Vice Chair Cox.
Yeah, just one thing. On the June meeting, I mean, if I would not be adverse to moving it to a Wednesday if it turned out that meant that committee member Hislop would be able to attend. But I mean, I don't know whether staff or the room are available. So, I mean, any thoughts
We have
on
to
that?
check that if the facilities are available and if all the staff is available that usually attends these meetings.
Okay. I guess the other thing about it is that, I really would like to keep it to the second week because those are our 6 weeks of vacation, and I didn't want that to get broken up. The other question that I have is, somebody had said we might talk about a 6 p.m. start time, and so I'm asking, are there people who want to talk about it? And I don't have anything to say up front until I've heard what other people say about it. So I'll take my request to speak out.
Alternate Balch.
And that is my comment. I love the idea of a 6 o'clock start time. Someone asked the question, and it was answered by staff that there's really no problem with that. So I am in favor of a 6 o'clock start time.
All right, Member Brown.
Same.
Member Hislop.
Yeah, I forgot. I'm the one that asked that. So, and I didn't mention that before. So, yeah, I'd be in favor too.
Neutral.
Vice Chair Cox, you're recognized.
Yeah, just I can go either way. I can see pluses or minuses, but like I'm flexible as Member Keating is, and so I will defer.
Defer would be correct. All right, I see no other comments on this item. Does anyone want to propose the motion? All right, we have a motion moved by Member Hislop. Would you like to say the motion?
Do I have to make an amendment? Do I have to make an amendment for the start time? Just make the motion.
You have to say it.
You can include it as
Make
part
the
of
motion that includes changing the start time to adopt the resolution and change the start time.
This is very exciting for me, my first time. Okay, I move that we adopt a resolution of the Rental Housing Committee of the City of Mountain View to set the dates for the Rental Housing Committee meetings for fiscal year 2025 to 2026, as noted on Exhibit A, with an amendment that the meeting start times are now at 6 p.m.
Motion made by Member Hislop, seconded by Member Brown. Is there any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, we will go to vote. Motion was voted unanimously in favor of the motion.
I just want to mention that the next meeting is still at 7 p.m. and then in the new fiscal year, the new schedule starts.
All right, we will now move on to agenda item 5.4, fiscal year 24-25 Rental Housing Committee Work Plan. Public comment will occur after the presentation item and committee questions. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
A very short one again. So the purpose of this agenda item is to review and provide input on the Rental Housing Committee fiscal year work plan. And the Rental Housing Committee, like other committees in the city, sets an annual work plan to guide the business of the Rental Housing Committee in providing a schedule of recurring and anticipated new items and an estimated timeline. So it includes items on an as-needed basis, such as appeal hearings and adoption and review of policies and regulations. It also includes recurring items, such as the budget review on an annual basis, the setting of the AGA, and updates on CSFRA and MHRSO programs. And it also includes new items that the Rental Housing Committee may want to bring forward in the coming months. And if needed, this work plan can be modified during the year. And I try to include the annual work plan on the slides. We'll do 3 months at a time for your review if you have any questions. And the recommendation is for the Rental Housing Committee to review and provide input to staff on this work plan. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, staff. Now we will move on to questions from committee members. Vice Chair Cox, you're organized.
Thank you. So here, I see two big items, I guess I would call them, the anti-harassment study session and the review of the MNOI. What's that?
You're speaking side.
Oh, okay. There we go. Okay, so I see two major items on the work plan other than, regular items and appeals coming up. One is the study session for the anti-harassment policy, and the other one is the review of the MNOI and petition process. And so on the anti-harassment stuff, I'm wondering, is that you have in the schedule just the initial study session, and then based on what comes out of it, there will be other study sessions or a public hearing? Or what? I mean, are we planning to finish that in this year?
Yeah, so as you can see then in the January work plan, as shown on the slide, under January, you can see then that the regulations will be presented to the Rental Housing Committee for adoption, depending on what the Rental Housing Committee is reviewing and giving feedback on in the earlier session.
Got it. And just so that I understand, this review of the MNOI and petition process, this is where, I remember watching the council meeting, and the council had asked for us to, review these changes that were requested by the landlords in the mobile home ordinance. Is it only the mobile home ordinance, or was it also the CSFRA?
So there was not a specific request for changes. Yes. So this topic came up when the city council discussed the AGA for the MHRSO, and they only refer to the appeal and petition process for the MHRSO.
Okay. But I mean, the idea there is that we would be looking at what is the proposal and recommending whether we would recommend some changes to it.
Well,
And
there is no specific proposal. They just want us to review the efficiency of the process. So
Okay.
what we imagine this would be an explanatory memo on
Okay.
how the process actually works. And then discuss with the rental housing committee first to see if any changes are warranted or not. And then
Okay.
depending on the rental housing committee's feedback, then that will be presented to the city council.
I understand now. Thank you for the clarification.
Any other questions from members? Seeing none, I now invite public comment. Any member of the public wishing to provide virtual comment on this item, that being the work plan, please click the raised hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Seeing none, we will go into committee deliberations and feedback. Vice Chair Cox. Okay, no, never mind then. Member his. No. Anyone else want to give any kind of comments or any changes to the work plan? We do not need to make a motion on this. So if we see nothing, that's it for this item. All right, we will now move on to committee staff announcements and updates. Staff?
Thank you. All right, so we'll take first a look at our upcoming events and workshops. Again, as always, we do continue to keep our virtual office hours every Tuesday from 10 a.m. to noon, and that's joinable at the link on the screen. And then upcoming workshops for the next month, we have next week an Understanding Utility Adjustment Petition tenant-focused virtual workshop in the evening at 6:30. And then in June, we have a Rent Stabilization 101 hybrid workshop. So that would be on Zoom, and it's also in the community center in the Maple Room. And then also at the same day, we have submitting a utility adjustment petition. However, this is landlord focused, and that will be virtual at 2 p.m. And we are continuing to keep our landlord help center hours every Thursday for the foreseeable future, as a lot of assistance is needed with the utility adjustment petition. So we're maintaining a lot of direct office hours and contact with our landlords. And that's both in person and online from 1 to 3 every Thursday. And they can also get help with anything else tenant landlord related. And our tenant help center is the first and third Thursday. These are in the evenings to accommodate people's working schedule. So that's from 6 to 8 p.m. at our office on Escuela and also on Zoom. And we have our staff present as well as CSA and someone from CLESPA to answer eviction and other legal type questions. And the mediation program is there as well. And then just to highlight, last Saturday, we had our 4th annual summer kickoff event. So you'll see our top left photo there. We have some of our rental housing committee members. We had Chair Ma, we had Vice Chair Cox, and committee member Keating is kind of hiding there in the bottom left. But they were all there to give out the raffle prizes, which was quite popular, and everybody had a great time with that. We had probably over 450 attendees. So every year it just keeps notching up a little bit more, and we're adding a little bit more activities, and it's getting more popular. So we just continue to look forward to that. If you'll see on the next slide, there's some fun Mickey and Minnie. There's Anki in our chalk contest, and we had a wonderful Spanish dance troupe coming and doing a presentation as well. So just to highlight that. Any questions or comments about events?
It was great.
Thank you. All righty. Then just to close out the meeting, we have some expected future agenda items. So next, Rental Housing Committee will be June 12th, and we'll look forward to having an appeal hearing. as well as approving some of our larger contracts, including Goldfarb and Littman and Project Sentinel. And that concludes the presentation.
Are there any additional comments or announcements from any committee members or any other staff? Member Hislop?
Thanks. I've heard about the fire at Oak Street Apartments. Remember that property? So I just was wondering, if you guys had any updates about family.
Yeah, we are in communication with the property owner and the property manager. Today we got in contact with them, so we're working with them through that.
If I recall correctly, it used to be a very elderly gentleman, but maybe it's passed on. So do you know if it's? I guess this was just sort of my curiosity. I was concerned. I used to talk to some of those residents.
Yeah, they've hired a property management company, and they manage quite a few properties in Mountain View, so they're on top of it.
Seeing no other comments or questions from committee members, the meeting is adjourned at 7:52 p.m. The next Randall Housing Committee meeting is scheduled to be held on Thursday, June 12th at 7 p.m. Good evening.